I was born and raised in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and I've lived and worked in New York City for the last 25 years, so right out of college. Even though my paintings are often referred to as landscape paintings, the relationship to the actual landscape is mostly a conceptual one. I'm not interested in rendering a place in oil paint, but rather in creating a dense, highly charged visual event, which is driven by the act of seeing, the process of seeing. I'll go through a few slides, and it's nice that we have paintings in the room, so you're kind of familiar with the way they look and the way they feel. This is this actually is one that is the mate to the big one out in the other room, the same size. And I'll run through the slides and just give you an idea of some of the more recent things like this. This is a longer horizontal one, which is about the same size, but just shorter in height. Over the last 25 years, my work has been a sustained meditation on three dominant things, three dominant inspirations. The first is the light and geography of coastal South Carolina, the Low Country, where I come from. The second is an interest in Irish Celtic art. And the third is the life and the work of the late Canadian pianist Glenn Gould. And I'll try to look at each one of those three and sort of show you how they weave into the work as we go along. For me, those three things are woven together by one idea, the notion of ecstasy, and I'll try to define that a little bit as we go. Each one, I think, is capable of creating the conditions for a gradual, momentary, heightened state of awareness, and I think that's an important component when looking at a painting. I always think of a painting as a kind of glue which binds together the physical world around us with the interior world of our imaginations. The painting is the mediator in between those two places. A painting is communication on a one-to-one level. And for as long as I can remember, I've been inspired by the light and geography of coastal South Carolina. But my work is not about reliving that experience, but about the total possessing of it. I'm going to show you some drawings. The great German artist Walter Sickert said that drawing is about captivity and painting is about freedom. I draw a lot, and my drawings are almost exclusively of trees, academically rendered with simple pencils, often on 8 by 11 pieces of paper, so roughly about that size. I do a lot of these on site, often when I'm down in South Carolina. This was done down in near Beaufort on a place called Spring Island. And I go down there, and I've done residencies there, and they basically give me a house to live in and a golf cart, and I take my radio with NPR and my bug spray and a dozen Krispy Kremes, and I just go off into the woods, and I sit there, and it's like a mobile studio, and I can just draw these trees. I make drawings from nature, especially in South Carolina, because I like the notion that the universal starts local, that it must be something personal to oneself. And I've always felt an affinity towards artists who have a strong relationship to a specific place. If you think of George O'Keeffe with the Southwest, think of the Hudson River School, or somebody like Grant Wood in Iowa. A strong relationship to one geography, one location. And the reason is because that notion of an obsession of returning to one place over and over and over again over years, to me suggests longing for something, an unfulfilled sense of longing, a yearning for something that one never quite gets. That's an important engine in my work, the notion of longing. Another one, looking down a path, very, very quintessential Low Country. A lot of the moss is done with erasing, actually, not with drawing. Sometimes I'll scatter just things on a table, like peppers, in this case. And really, it's just a love of rendering the three-dimensional world on a two-dimensional surface, no more than that. They have no direct relationship to the paintings. They're not studies for anything. They just feel good, and I just do them along the way. Occasionally, figures. I was in Ireland for a year in the late 90s, and I would sometimes meet people and begin to sketch them in person and then finish it with just by imagination or memory. Good rugged faces. Another one. And another one back into the Low Country. My work is very much about place, about location. And the reason I draw trees is not for their timeless beauty, but because I'm obsessed with the moment that the trunk intersects with the ground, that unconditional bulletproof marking of location. It's a vertical thrust into a horizontal context. That moment, I love the trunk when it hits the earth right there. To me, it embodies everything I want in a painting. It's solid, it's unconditional, it's immovable, it's immutable, all those things. I love that moment. and it marks location. That's very important to me, that my paintings enact place, that they don't represent a place, that they are a place. They represent a physical moment, a physical event in time, in the space of the viewer. And I've always felt that I don't need a position in my work because I have a place, I have a location. I was born in the prickly heat of South Carolina in the Low Country. And as a kid, I always thought that I could see the air around me, the air between things. And with humidity, that's actually not so off the mark, And I think, as the older I get, I think the reason I'm a painter is because of humidity. I thought that I could see air like that. And then you try to paint air, which is impossible, but we try. I had the pleasure of growing up near water. And I think all of these things, these beautiful places, taught me how to see. Seeing is different than looking. Seeing is deeper. It's more enduring. It's more complex. I learned about color by azalea bushes, pink and fuchsia azaleas, and I would walk out with my grandfather, probably 5 years old, as far back as I can remember, and I would just bury my face into the pink flowers up to my ears, just to fill my retinas with color, burning color. I think that certainly informs my use of color. I learned about tone, the lights and darks from Spanish moss, the way that light filters through that. I learned about rhythm, which is very important in a painting. I'll talk about from the ocean, from waves, from watching waves over and over. I learned about texture from pluff mud. Anybody knows the marshes, pluff mud. Scooping big heaps of it up like clay in my hands and squishing it between my fingers. And I'd splat it out on the dock and then take colored paper and sprinkle it in there and then squish it again and put more and just create these layered cakes of mud. It just felt good. And when I use paint, I very much think of mud, of sticky mud. You can see it on the left side, on the right side. This place to me was so beautiful I couldn't stand it, and I felt like I had to do something with that, and that led me to begin drawing and painting, and I've never wanted or done anything else. The notion of South Carolina very much informs the way that I compose my paintings, often with a light area at the top, cascading down into a darker, heavier area at the bottom, which is essentially the reverse of what Monet called load and support, where often he would have the light at the bottom with the dark on the top. So one is a load, one is a support. It's really it's a replicating of the orientation that we see nature, light up here and dark down there. You'll notice also in a lot of the paintings there tends to be a lot of information compressed at the edges and then often a proscenium, a stage or a space or a void, usually off-center. And the reason is to create the idea of a picture within a picture, a world inside of a world. The first is the actual rectangle, and then the subsidiary spaces that move inward and inward and inward, a space inside of a space, to pull your eye, to pull your gaze into the painting. I use foreground and background in a couple of different ways. In the traditional sense, all the painters know foreground elements tend to be larger in shape, more resolute in focus, and also brighter or warmer in color. They feel like they're coming forward. The colors get a little cooler as you go back, more grays, purples, magentas, greens, like that, and also smaller in shape. So you suggest the diminution of space, of objects as they get smaller, as they go back. In the conceptual sense, I think of foreground as the physical world, the sticky physical world, the body, the skin. And then I think of the background as the liquid world of the imagination, the private interior world. So there's exterior, interior, again. And there's often very little or no middle ground in the way that I work. I love to jump from very foreground to very background. That's something I learned from the Canadian group of 7, the painters from the 1920s, who worked in and around Toronto, and they would create little small oil paintings of the raw Canadian landscape that they knew so well. It was their identity as Canadians. They would often have only foreground and then only background to give the viewer the impression of being directly in front of nature with nothing in between. It's you and the rawness of nature that comes from that. I have a love affair with color. I use color intuitively. I experiment in lots and lots of mistakes. And I try to push color as far as I possibly can, with strange juxtapositions, levels of intensity. And I like the notion of going overboard, going too far with color. I like effusiveness, almost like too loud in places. And indeed, one of my teachers said that sometimes too much is just right. I love the notion of going overboard. I spend my life going bonkers. And that critics have said before that perhaps is a Southern trait. The notion of it's the humidity again, like that. But the notion of effusiveness and generosity, you see it in literature and in poetry and in painting. I'm thinking of Halsey and J. Bardin and some of the Southern painters, the South Carolina painters. For me, the paint is not in service of the image, but it's the other way around. I don't want to use color to describe a thing. I want to try to use the color as the thing itself.